Part 5. The fate of being raped and humiliated tonight was inevitable. Isn't the imperial doctor here yet? Xia Linxuan asked with some dissatisfaction when he noticed Xiao Beiji walking into the room. While reaching out his hand to gently wipe the sweat from Pu Qiutai's forehead. Your Majesty, please wait a moment. The elders at the imperial hospital are all old and their legs and feet are not very agile. Xiao Beiji replied with a smile. He glanced secretly and saw Pu Qiutai lying on the large and luxurious dragon bed. He was heartbroken, jumped a few times suddenly. Your Majesty. This, Master Pu is just a minister. This dragon bed. The personal eunuch is unlucky, Xiao Beiji lamented in his heart. He knew that the emperor was not in a good mood at the moment. But it was his duty and he had to remind him. It is because the symbolic meaning of this dragon bed is so great that even the concubines in the harem, not even the dignified queen and the most favored concubine, have ever had their hands on this bed. Those concubines who were sent to sleep on the first night were all on the bed in the side hall. And most of them had to be carried back after they were done. Only a few who were beautiful in appearance or charming in ways were able to please the emperor, then stay until dawn. Now, the dragon bed in the main hall is actually occupied by Pu Qiutai. Although he knows that this is the emperor's intention, Xiao Beiji still feels that it is very inappropriate. So what? Xia Linxuan said in a deep voice, slowly swiping his fingers across Pu Qiutai's thin lips. And then he suddenly smiled in a low voice and said softly, he will still be lying here for a long time in the future. There was a gudong sound, but Xiao Beiji was so frightened that he sat down on the ground. He looked at this wise and mighty young emperor in disbelief, and his heart was like 10,000 buffaloes galloping past. What does the emperor mean? God, please tell me, it's not what I think. Your Majesty, you don't have strange thoughts about Mr. Pu. Xia Linxuan glanced at Xiao Beiji and sneered. You have been with me for so long and your concentration is still so bad. Look at how hopeless you are. Xiao Beiji was about to cry but had no tears. He thought to himself, Your Majesty, just because of your sudden thunderbolt, if this slave didn't faint, it would be regarded as having extraordinary concentration, okay? Just when I thought of this, I heard footsteps outside, and then the voice of a young eunuch said outside the curtain. Lu Hongdao of the Taiyuan Hospital has an audience. Allow. Xia Linxuan quickly announced Lu Hongdao's entrance in a loud voice. Then gave way and put Pu Qiutai's thin arm beside the bed to diagnose Lu Hongdao's pulse. The old doctor almost frightened the unconscious young man on the dragon bed out of his body. But after all, he was a mature man. He only took one look and guessed the clues from Xia Linxuan's nervous expression. There was no expression on his face. But because he could see how much Xia Linxuan valued Pu Qiutai, the old doctor was extremely careful and serious, and stopped after a long while. How? Seeing Lu Hongdao withdraw his hand, Xia Linxuan quickly put his head in and asked hurriedly. Replying to the emperor, this gentleman was temporarily comatose because of mental exhaustion. He can wake up slowly after resting for 3/4 of an hour. However, his body seems to be somewhat deficient in energy and blood. He should take good care of himself on weekdays. Lu Hongdao answered respectfully. Xia Linxuan nodded. It would be strange if he could finish a long poem in one breath and not run out of energy. He felt relieved knowing that Pu Qiutai was fine. He motioned Lu Hongdao to follow Xiao Beiji to fill out the prescription. After thinking for a while, he suddenly said again, with his appearance, is there any difficulty in having sex? Lu Aiqing, you should know what I am referring to. Lu Hongdao's heart felt as if he had been hit by a heavy hammer. And he could not help but tremble. Xiao Beiji beside him also shook his body. Back to the emperor, although this lord is a little weak in health. He should be fine in the sexual intercourse. Lu Hongdao, as a senior physician in the Taiyuan hospital, did not personally see Pu Qiutai, but he also heard from his colleagues. Having experienced the deeds of this young adult, one cannot help but sigh twice for him at this time. But so what? He would never dare to deceive the emperor just because he sympathized with Pu Qiutai. Hearing that the emperor could ask such a question in public, he knew that he was bound to win over this gentleman. Once he had foolishly lied to Lord Pu out of sympathy. If the emperor got anxious and ordered another imperial doctor to diagnose and treat him, he would be waiting to lose his head. Dr. Lu made a small explanation in his mind for his unsympathetic behavior of helping the tiger. It wasn't that he didn't have sympathy, but that he didn't dare to sympathize. He suddenly felt at ease, bowed, and then exited the dormitory. Pu Qiutai's brows finally moved and wrinkled slightly, then a groan escaped from his thin lips. And his bright eyes slowly opened. Xia Linxuan never knew that he was such a human being, inferior to a beast. Just hearing that moan made his lower body involuntarily harden. Grabbing Pu Qiutai's thin wrist, he seriously considered whether to devour the poor lamb tonight or give him some time to adapt. If you want to give time to adapt, how long will it take? Are 2 hours enough? Oh, it seems too long. An hour? Well, what's the difference between an hour and half an hour? Emperor? While he was thinking seriously, he suddenly heard an exclamation from beneath him. When he looked down, he saw Pu Qiutai getting up from the bed in a panic. Seeing his eyes looking around in panic, Xia Linxuan knew that he knew where he was. You just wrote that long poem in one breath. You were so exhausted that you fell into a coma for a while. So, I brought you over to rest. The imperial doctor has already come to see you and said that there is nothing serious. Xia Linxuan stared at Pu Qiutai's face, with a hint of lust in his sharp eyes. However, Pu Qiutai didn't notice that this poor talented man was not married yet. He always kept his etiquette and restrained himself, so how could he know what it would be like to look at him with lust? He was just a little flustered. He seemed to be sleeping on a dragon bed? What on earth does the emperor want to do? This is a crime of great disrespect. If he wants to die, why can't he find an excuse? Or, thinking of a possibility, Pu Qiutai's heart tightened suddenly. Could it be that his poem that satirized Wu Tiande was so harsh that it made the emperor angry and wanted to find an excuse to destroy his entire clan? As soon as I thought about this, all the cold sweat broke out on my body. But Pu Qiutai didn't know what to say or do. Should I kneel down and beg the emperor to tell him that he was wrong? But what's wrong with him? When did the generals who rebelled and surrendered have to be forced to sing praises? What's wrong? Qiutai is scared? In fact, Pu Qiutai has always been desolated and miserable in front of Xia Linxuan, cautious but always testing the other party like a moth to the fire, and then frightened by the emperor's lust. He could not resist and could only accept it and be a submissive minister. Xia Linxuan did be afraid and hatred deep in his bones. Xia Linxuan didn't like cowardly people. But he only liked to see Pu Qiutai helpless and fearful in front of him. Even after seeing it many times, he still didn't change his original intention. I deserve to die for my crime. Pu Qiutai didn't know what to say. He could only kneel on the big bed and beg Xia Linxuan. He wanted to die. But he was just afraid that his family would be implicated. Do you want to die so much? Xia Linxuan suddenly climbed onto the bed, pressed the unsuspecting Pu Qiutai under him, and said in a low voice, "From the first time the two of us met until now, I can see that Qiutai is not afraid of death. The so-called death is the only way to survive the hardships of the ages." Since Qiutai is not even afraid of death, then other pains in this world are certainly not a problem. Why not? Just let me do it. Xiao Beiji came back from seeing off the imperial doctor. As soon as he reached the door of the outer room, he heard his shameless emperor say such words with a shy face. He trembled a little, and hurriedly waved to all the eunuchs and maids inside and outside the house, and then quietly retreated outside the palace with them. Father-in-law. When a palace maid heard Pu Qiutai's scream coming from the palace, she couldn't help but turn pale, and quietly asked Xiao Beiji, "Your Majesty, he can't be. Do you want to die? Do you have any room to discuss what the emperor wants to do?" Xiao Beiji glared at the palace maid fiercely. Then his cold eyes passed over the faces of the eunuchs and palace maids around him one by one, and whispered, "Don't blame me for not warning you. If you want to live, just shut up tight your mouth. If you have the habit of talking in your sleep, cut your tongue first. It is better to cut your tongue now than to lose your life. If I hear any news about this matter from inside and outside the palace, you will all wait and fill the well." Yes. The little eunuch and the maids were so frightened that they all shivered. Xiao Beiji gave some instructions to the guards outside the door, leaving 6 eunuchs on duty in the wing outside, waiting for summons at any time. Then he quietly closed the door of the palace gate. The Yongxin Hall is the emperor's special bedroom. It is very spacious. Now Xia Linxuan and Pu Qiutai are in the innermost bedroom. Xiao Beiji is guarding the door. He can only vaguely hear Pu Qiutai's angry screams and Xia Linxuan's cold voice coming from the hall. He sighed, shook his head and thought, "Isn't the emperor too impatient? Why don't you let Mr. Pu rest for 2 days? It's also a good time to have fun while Mr. Pu drank a lot today and is exhausted and has no strength to resist. Otherwise, in a few days, if the emperor is as fierce as Mr. Pu, even if the emperor has brute strength, it will not be easy to subdue him, right?" The Nuo Da Hall calmed down for a while. Xia Linxuan knelt down on the dragon bed, pressing Pu Qiutai's arm with his knees. He untied his dragon robe slowly and said teasingly, "Tisk. Tisk. Qiutai, don't waste your efforts. Listen. There is no one outside. My slaves have always been smart and knowledgeable. Qiutai, you should learn from their obedient spirit." Pu Qiutai's hair was disheveled, and his face was pale. The sweat on his forehead was wet with the ends of his hair. His eyes were filled with boundless anger and resentment. He panted heavily and looked at the emperor who was sitting astride him. If possible, he would have liked to kick this beastly and stupid king under the bed, but because he was stuffy during the dinner, he drank a few more glasses of wine. He was already too drunk. So he took advantage of the drunkenness to compose that long poem. At this time, although Xia Linxuan's unethical behavior was so frightening that his mind came to his senses, his limbs were still limp and unable to exert any strength. You have always claimed to be a wise master. Is this your way to be a king?" At the critical moment, even though he knew that the emperor would not reason with him, the scholar's instinct made Pu Qiutai unable to help but speak. Before he could finish speaking, Xia Linxuan had already removed his last piece of clothing, revealing his bronzed and muscular naked body. Pu Qiutai couldn't help but closed his eyes. A man's body was nothing to him. But if this man was the one who pressed him and wanted to rape him, then it would be a different matter. Qiutai's eyelashes are so long. They look so beautiful whether his eyes are open or closed. Xia Linxuan leaned over and placed a gentle kiss on the long eyelashes. Then he pinched Pu Qiutai's chin, forcing him to open his red lips slightly, then brought his mouth closer and rubbed against the soft lips. After a few clicks, he inserted his tongue into Tan Tan's mouth and began to stir and suck. Pu Qiutai desperately tried to struggle and resist, and his satin smooth green hair dragged erratically on the pillow as he moved his head left and right, becoming a little messy in the blink of an eye. Xia Linxuan enjoyed the kiss to the fullest until he saw Pu Qiutai's face turn red, and his eyes gradually blurred. He knew that the other person was about to suffocate, so he raised his body and finally let the other person go mercifully. Before Pu Qiutai could breathe a sigh of relief, a dry and thick hand pulled off his belt, and the gorgeous brocade robe instantly parted to both sides, revealing the jacket underneath. Xia Linxuan looked at the blue jacket and smiled deeply. He gently stroked Pu Qiutai's face with one hand. He shook his head and said with a smile, "This is Farong's craftsmanship, right? It shows that I chose her to serve you. It's absolutely true. She is the only one who can be so careful and such a good female celebrity. It's a pity. It's a pity that he didn't say anything, but his next action said it all." The thin cotton wadding jacket was torn apart easily by Xia Linxuan. The cotton batting and the outer satin cloth were flying around the bed like butterflies. Pu Qiutai couldn't help but clenched his fists. The proud emperor used this action to tell him, "Don't think about resisting." He had no chance or possibility of resisting. "Don't think about biting your tongue to commit suicide. I have tried it. The so-called suicide by biting your tongue is nothing more than rumors spread by foolish men and women." Xia Linxuan saw Pu Qiutai's throat twitching slightly, mistakenly thinking that he was about to struggle to the death, and quickly warned him. Even so, his hand had already pinched Pu Qiutai's chin, and then said coldly, "I am very powerful to you tonight. You must think about your family and fellow villagers. Isn't it just for them that you are struggling to survive? Even at the expense of losing your reputation? Shameless." Pu Qiutai gritted his teeth and said fiercely, "Besides using those innocent lives to threaten me, what else can you do? What other means can you use to get it? Since this method is useful to you, why should I look for other methods?" Xia Linxuan smiled and unbuttoned Pu Qiutai's shirt, revealing a large area of white and delicate neck and chest skin. The eyes of the majestic emperor were like a hungry wolf seeing a large piece of fresh flesh and blood. He licked his lower lips, his voice slightly hoarse due to the excitement and upcoming sex. "Do you think I am a pedantic nerd like you who doesn't know how to adapt? Since I am a nerd, why do you have to be so condescending?" Pu Qiutai's unfinished words were choked in his throat by Xia Linxuan's second predatory kiss. Then the bastard emperor straightened up and said smugly, "Besides the actors, the ones that the dignitaries like to play most are you scholars. Conquest is always the most enjoyable, isn't it? Just to conquer?" Pu Qiutai asked with a trembling voice. He stared at Xia Linxuan, his desperate and cruel eyes, which actually made the emperor who was not afraid of heaven and earth feel a different kind of feeling in his heart. So he was stunned for a moment. Yes, just conquest. How could the arrogant emperor admit that he had feelings for a man? Even his concubines were just his playthings. A male favorite was also a disobedient male favorite. How could he be expected to say that he fell in love at first sight and couldn't help himself? This was no longer a joke, but an insult to his imperial dignity. "If it is just conquest, I am already your subject. What else do you want?" Your Majesty, Mr. Shen said that you are a wise master." "Are you such a wise master? You humiliate your ministers. Act wantonly. You should know that you have never truly thought about being a competent minister." Xia Linxuan coldly interrupted Pu Qiutai's words. His hands moved on the smooth shoulders, and the genitals under his crotch were clamoring to break into the thin man's attractive body. However, he suppressed it and looked at Pu Qiutai sarcastically. He sneered and said, "Why is Qiutai so angry? Maybe in your heart, you hope that I favor you because I like you, not just to conquer you? Hunjun. The cold words pierced Pu Qiutai's heart like red-hot needles. Xia Linxuan's words were like knives, humiliating his fragile heart into pieces. He suddenly struggled with all his strength. The power generated in this moment even made Xia Linxuan stunned. It was almost impossible to control him. With a pop sound, a slap fell on Pu Qiutai's face, knocking his head to the side. Xia Linxuan angrily tore at the few remaining clothes he had. After a while, the snow-white shirt and trousers were reduced to pieces of rags scattered half of the dormitory. Looking at the naked Pu Qiutai, Xia Linxuan gasped for breath. The primitive beast-like instinct in his body seemed to have awakened. He couldn't wait to turn over this man who was as helpless as a lamb. Just because you have never played with men doesn't mean you don't know how to play with men. There are also many wonderful pictures of men having sex in the erotic albums in the palace. The postures are as exciting as having sex with women. Let me go. Let me go. Help. The cold air blew over his back and exposed buttocks. Pu Qiutai, who realized what Xia Linxuan was going to do, couldn't help but scream desperately. The miserable voice echoed in the palace, but there was no response. Roughly spreading the two tender white buttocks, although Pu Qiutai is very thin, the shape of these two buttocks is perfect. Xia Linxuan felt the tender and elastic feeling under his hands and thought that he was still too thin. If he gained some weight and made his butt more perky, the taste would be even more ecstasy. Pu Qiutai refused to give up. He grabbed the pillow at the head of the bed with both hands and wriggled forward desperately, trying to get rid of Xia Linxuan's imprisonment. However, the cruel emperor always pulled him back to the desperate place after he tried his best to climb out for a short distance. After going back and forth several times in the abyss, Pu Qiutai was so exhausted that his whole body was exhausted. His hair was wet with sweat, and his naked body was all wet, as if he had just been fished out of the water. Such a picture is extremely sexy. Xia Linxuan's tongue kept sticking out and retracting. He originally wanted to test his determination, thinking that he would have to wait at least half an hour to prove that he would not do it moved by lust, but now, he couldn't control it. It didn't matter if it lasted for half an hour. He just wanted to penetrate this body that was lovable but made people want to ravage it. Ah! The screams echoed in the palace. And Pu Qiutai was shocked to feel that something had penetrated into the shameful place that he had never dared to think about. The boundless shame made him gain some strength again. But this time he did not wait for any more. Xia Linxuan, who had run out of patience, then inserted a second finger into the tight little hole. Two fingers roughly dug into the warm and squirming inner wall a few times, and Xia Linxuan couldn't wait to thrust the huge penis in. In order to allow Pu Qiutai to accommodate his huge penis smoothly, he cruelly spread his two fingers, and just stretched out the narrow hole into a faint and irregular-shaped hole. Ah! With heartbreaking screams, Pu Qiutai's hands holding the sheets suddenly shrank. When he realized that the fate of being raped and humiliated tonight was inevitable. He once thought that he would never compromise, even if he died. Make any sound to excite this cruel and ruthless king even more. However, when the pain that seemed to tear his entire body came, he realized how naive and ridiculous his backbone was. It was not the severe pain that a person could bear, even if someone used a hot iron to burn the skin at will. If so, it shouldn't cause such pain that goes deep into the bone marrow, right? However, as soon as the screams came out, he blocked his mouth with his trembling fists. And tears flowed uncontrollably from his eyes, streaking across his delicate face. It's so tight. No wonder so many people like to play with men. They are indeed more delicious than women. Xia Linxuan, who was on the bed, completely transformed into a ferocious beast. carelessly uttering obscene words that made people blush and their hearts beat. The emperor's nobility and elegance were gone. He was like a wolf eager to bite its prey, pushing his waist forward moment by moment, and with his cruel and pioneering movements, the huge penis opened the narrow passage inch by inch, and finally penetrated all the way. Pu Qiutai blocked his mouth with his fist, but broken screams and moans still escaped from his mouth. Tears kept flowing. He didn't want to cry, but he couldn't control himself at all. The inhuman pain and torture made him want to endure it. He was tortured to death by 1,000 cuts. However, Xia Linxuan was obviously not satisfied with this. After squeezing the huge penis into the narrow hole, he paused for no more than a blink of an eye, then slowly pulled it out. And then violently and forcefully broke into the newly closed tunnel. Pu Qiutai's upper body was raised high due to pain. His head was tilted upward with force, and his neck bent in a graceful and desolate arc. Along with Xia Linxuan's adulterous thrusting movements, another sound escaped from his blood-stained lips, a whimpering moan. "No. Don't. Please kill me. Kill me, please. It hurts. Ooh, it hurts so much. You kill me. Woo." Xia Linxuan stared at the loose black hair without any sympathy. And taking advantage of this gap, his hands went around Pu Qiutai's chest, keenly capturing the two shriveled beans. After a few fierce rubs, the two pale pink beans slowly stood up and turned into dark red cherries. "The taste of Qiutai really makes me ecstasy." Xia Linxuan hugged Pu Qiutai tightly to prevent him from lying down anymore. His swollen and ferocious penis thrust in and out without showing any signs of weakness, repeatedly ravaging the sensitive and tight vagina corridor. Blood flowed out from the place where their lower bodies were connected, staining the sheets underneath them red with the auspicious patterns of dragons and phoenixes embroidered on them. The moans gradually became fainter, and with the lubrication of the blood, the huge, thick and long weapon was wreaking havoc in the corridor. After an unknown period of time, the rapid surge of pleasure in all the limbs overwhelmed Xia Linxuan, and he roared. Waves of dragon essence were released in Pu Qiutai's body. The thin body underneath him was motionless. And it wasn't until Pu Qiutai turned over that Xia Linxuan realized that he had already passed out. This made him a little dissatisfied. The process of ejaculating in the other person's body, which could humiliate the other person to the greatest extent, was not felt by Pu Qiutai, which made him very unhappy. His consciousness was floating in the darkness. Suddenly, the cold stimulation on his face forced Pu Qiutai's consciousness back from the darkness. He opened his eyes and saw Xia Linxuan grinning in front of him. For a moment, he didn't realize where he was. Why is this hateful king by his side? Xia Linxuan slowly placed the teacup on the table, then stretched out his hand to grab the erect cherry on Pu Qiutai's chest twice. Hearing a cry of pain escape from the other party's mouth, he sneered. "What? How long will it take to be unconscious? Want to use it? Are you in a coma to escape the process of pampering you?" Pu Qiutai suddenly remembered the horrific things that had happened before. But soon he discovered another fact that frightened him beyond measure. His arms were tied behind his back, and his chest was tightly strangled by two ropes. The originally thin bulge actually appeared soft and slightly convex under this deliberate binding. The two nipples stood erect on the thin breasts. As long as they were slightly deflated, Xia Linxuan would immediately use his fingers to tug to make them erect again. I don't know how many times he had ravaged them, but the originally small nipples turned out to be swollen. It's gotten a bit bigger. The shame was far more than that. His thighs and calves were also tied together and forced to be widely separated on both sides. The place that was so painful that he was dying was still sore and swollen. Xia Linxuan had no time to manipulate an object in and out of the hole, just like he had just raped Pu Qiutai. This is a book of erotic pictures I came across by chance. It's very interesting. There are 26 pictures in it, all about bondage. It turns out that as long as a person is tied up, there are so many tricks to play with. I have never tried it before. And this is the first time I tried it on Qiutai today. I didn't expect the effect to be so good. Tisk. Qiutai. Do you know how lustful and charming you look now? As Xia Linxuan said that he pulled out the jade stick, and then he flipped Pu Qiutai onto the bed. And his huge penis broke in again without hesitation. The rapid rhythm of thrusting made Pu Qiutai's body sway all the time, but this position made him unable to make any resistance. In the middle, Xia Linxuan got excited and turned him over again, making him kneel on the bed in a position even more embarrassing than a bitch, with his butt raised high and let penetrate to him. Ah, woo woo woo. Tears kept falling, and Pu Qiutai's voice was hoarse. He passed out, but was soon awakened by the pain and stimulation inflicted by Xia Linxuan. He was fucked thousands of times without knowing it. Suddenly, all the demons behind him the movement stopped. Pu Qiutai had no idea what was happening until the depths of his intestines were trembled by waves of heat. Until Xia Linxuan proudly told him that he had swallowed all the other party's dragon essence with his small mouth, only then did he realize what was happening. No. Pu Qiutai let out a sad roar. It was really a shame for a man to do what he did. Pu Qiutai, who was completely devastated, felt a sweet sensation in his throat. With a plop sound, he spurted out a mouthful of blood. And then passed out completely.